My name is Michael Carter. I was an FBI agent specializing in cults, secret societies, and conspiracy theories. My job was to expose lies, dismantle organizations built on manipulation, and separate truth from paranoia. I thought I understood how the world worked. I thought reality was fixed, that history was a straight line, that memories were proof of existence. I was wrong. It started with a missing journalist, a man who disappeared without a trace as if he had never existed. His name was erased from databases, his files vanished, even his own family claimed he had never been born. I should have walked away, but I didn't. I dug deeper. I found things I wasn't supposed to see. And then they found me. I woke up in a hospital with no memory of how I got there. The date hadn't changed. My apartment was untouched. Everyone around me acted as if nothing had happened. But I remembered. And that was my mistake. Because now I know the truth. Reality isn't real, it's rewritten, controlled, and the ones pulling the strings don't want me to talk. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss new stories. If you enjoyed this one, leave a like, it really helps. And don't forget to share your thoughts in the comments. Let's discuss. I never believed in fate. As an FBI agent specializing in cults and conspiracy theories, my job was to tear apart the illusions that controlled weak minds. I exposed frauds, infiltrated secret societies, and dismantled manipulative groups that preyed on fear and ignorance. I prided myself on being a man of logic, someone who didn't fall for fairy tale. But now, as I sit in this dark motel room, staring at the reflection of a man I no longer recognize, I realize that I was wrong about everything. If you're watching this, if this recording ever makes it out, know this. The world you think you live in is a lie, and the people who run it don't want you to wake up. It started 3 months ago, a routine investigation into a missing journalist named Daniel Whitaker. He had been researching an underground organization called the Architects, a group whispered about in conspiracy circles but dismissed as fiction by every mainstream source. Whitaker believed they weren't just another secret society. He claimed they were something much older, much deeper, pulling the strings of world events for centuries. His last known location was a decaying apartment in Baltimore where he had left behind cryptic notes, newspaper clippings, and a single phrase scrawled on the wall in black ink: "They erase the eraser." The words made no sense at the time, just another paranoid rant from someone who had spent too much time chasing shadows. But then the anomalies started. Whitaker's birth records disappeared from government databases. His name was scrubbed from employment records. Even his family claimed he never existed. I went back to the Baltimore precinct that initially reported him missing, but the officer who had filed the report looked at me like I was insane. "There was never a case about a journalist named Whitaker," he said. "Are you sure you got the name right?" I was sure. I had held the case file in my hands. But when I returned to my office, it was gone. My computer logs showed no record of me accessing it. The only proof I had was a single page I had printed on the first day, a timeline of Whitaker's last movements. But when I looked at it again, something had changed. The dates were wrong. The timestamps no longer matched my memory. I started to feel it then, that creeping sense of something watching me from the corners of my life, slipping in and out of my reality like a ghost in the machine. People I had worked with for years seemed off, slightly different, subtle changes in their speech, their mannerisms. My boss, Agent Holloway, who had once been a chain smoker with a nicotine-stained voice, now acted as if he had never touched a cigarette in his life. I brought it up jokingly in conversation one day, expecting him to laugh it off. Instead, he just looked at me, confused, and said, "Mike, I quit smoking 15 years ago." But I remembered the ashtray on his desk, the way he used to roll his own cigarettes during late-night stakeouts. I remembered. That's when I knew something was wrong, not just with the case, but with reality itself. And then the calls started. A blocked number, a voice distorted beyond recognition. "Stop looking." That was the first call. The second came at 3:33 a.m., a whispering static that sent chills down my spine. "You are not supposed to remember." By the third call, I had stopped sleeping. Then came the package. No return address. Just a plain brown envelope slipped under my apartment door. Inside was a single Polaroid photo. A picture of me. Not from the past, not from my FBI records, but from a moment that had never happened. In the image, I was sitting in a room I didn't recognize, wearing clothes I didn't own, shaking hands with a man whose face was blurred out like a corrupted file. And then, the final piece. A note written in my own handwriting, a message I had no memory of ever writing. "You've seen behind the curtain. They won't let you leave." That was 2 days ago. Since then, I've been running, changing motels, switching burner phones, staying off the grid as much as possible. I don't know how much time I have left before they find me, but I need to get this story out before it's too late. Because I finally understand what Whitaker meant. They don't just control the world, they control reality itself. I barely slept that night. The motel walls felt thinner than paper, every creak of the floorboards outside my door sending a surge of paranoia through me. I sat on the edge of the bed, gripping the gun I had stolen from an old contact, staring at the Polaroid in my other hand. My own handwriting taunted me. "You've seen behind the curtain. They won't let you leave." My own words. But I had never written them. At least, not that I remembered. I had to act. I couldn't sit here waiting for them to find me. Whatever they were. I still had one lead left. An address scribbled in the margins of Whitaker's timeline. A place I had dismissed as irrelevant the first time I saw it. 311 Rosewood Drive. I didn't recognize it, but my gut told me that if I wanted answers, I had to go there. The house was on the outskirts of the city, far enough from the main roads that it felt like it existed outside of time. It was one of those old Victorian-style homes, the kind that had been beautiful once but now sat abandoned, its windows boarded up, its wooden steps rotting from neglect. I parked 2 blocks away, making sure I wasn't followed, and made my way through the overgrown yard. The door was unlocked. Inside, dust coated every surface. The air smelled like mildew and something metallic. I moved carefully through the rooms, scanning for anything out of place. It wasn't until I reached the study that I found it. A desk covered in yellowed newspaper clippings, scattered notes and photographs. My stomach turned when I saw them. Pictures of me. Some from my past investigations, others from moments I knew had never happened. One in particular sent ice through my veins, a shot of me walking into FBI headquarters just a week ago. But the timestamp in the corner read March 14, 1997. It was impossible. I turned my attention to the notes. Most were incoherent scribbles, phrases repeated over and over. Time is a loop. They erase the eraser. March 14 exists twice. But one stood out, written in bold letters across an entire page. If you see him, run. That's when I heard it. A floorboard creaking upstairs. Someone was here. I moved fast, pulling my gun and stepping into the hallway, my breath shallow. The house had been silent when I entered. Whoever else was inside had either been here the whole time or had followed me in. Another creak, then another, slow, deliberate. I aimed up the staircase, waiting for movement. "FBI," I called out, though I knew my badge meant nothing anymore. "Come out slowly." Nothing. I took the first step, then the second, the third. The air felt heavier the higher I climbed, as if something unseen was pressing against my skin. At the top of the stairs, a hallway stretched in both directions, doors lining each side. The noise had come from the last room on the left. I moved toward it, heart pounding, each step an eternity. I reached the door and pushed it open. The room was empty, no furniture, no windows, just 4 bare walls and a single object in the center of the floor, a tape recorder. I hesitated before stepping inside, gun still raised. The recorder looked ancient, the kind with physical buttons and a cassette inside. There was a single note taped to it. 4 words, written in shaking handwriting. "Press play, don't stop." Against every instinct in my body, I pressed play. At first, static. Then a voice, distorted, faint, but unmistakably mine. If you're hearing this, it means I failed. My pulse skyrocketed. The voice on the tape sounded tired, desperate. I don't know how many times I've tried, but they always find me. They always reset me. You don't have much time. If you're still in the house, you need to leave. Now. A loud creak. Not from the tape. From behind me. I spun, but the hallway was empty. The walls seemed wrong. Like the angles were slightly off, the shadows stretching in ways that defied physics. My mind screamed at me to run, but the tape kept playing. They won't kill you, Mike. Not yet. But if they get to you, you'll wake up in your apartment tomorrow and none of this will have happened. You'll think it was just another case. You'll go back to work, and then you'll disappear again. I couldn't breathe. The air felt thick, pressing in on my chest. The voice on the tape took a shaky breath. They control reality. They control time. And once you see them, the tape cut off. Footsteps. Fast. Coming toward me from the hallway. I grabbed the tape recorder and bolted. I didn't look back. I didn't want to see what was chasing me. I tore down the stairs, nearly slipping on the dust-covered floor, my legs screaming at me to move faster. I hit the front door at full speed, bursting outside into the cold night air. I sprinted to my car, heart hammering, shoving the key into the ignition with shaking hands. The engine roared to life. The rearview mirror, I saw the house. The doors stood open, but no one came out. I didn't stop driving until I was miles away. I pulled over in an empty parking lot, my hands still gripping the wheel. The tape recorder sat on the passenger seat, silent now. But I didn't dare press play again, because I knew. I had heard my own voice warn me. And yet, as I sat there, a terrible thought crept into my mind. One that I couldn't shake. How many times had I done this before? I don't remember when I lost control of the car. One moment I was gripping the wheel, my knuckles white, the highway stretching endlessly before me. The next, something shifted. The headlights flickered, the road darkened, and an unbearable ringing filled my ears. My vision blurred as if the world itself was being rewritten. And then, nothing. No impact, no crash, just a sensation of falling. When I opened my eyes, I wasn't in my car anymore. I wasn't anywhere. Darkness stretched in every direction, thick and suffocating, but it wasn't just the absence of light. It was something alive, something that watched. The silence was unbearable, pressing against my skull, making my thoughts feel sluggish and distorted. My breathing was the only sound, shallow and frantic, but even that seemed stolen by the void around me. I turned, or at least I thought I did. There was no up or down here, no sense of direction. My body felt weightless, but at the same time impossibly heavy, as if I were sinking into something unseen. I reached out into the darkness, expecting nothing, but my fingers brushed against something solid. A surface? A wall? No, it was glass, cold, smooth, stretching infinitely in every direction. My own reflection stared back at me, but it wasn't right. The eyes were too dark, too deep, as if there was something else staring out from beneath my skin. Then the reflection moved. Not a delayed reaction, not a trick of the light. It moved before I did. I froze as my other self tilted its head slightly, observing me with an expression I didn't recognize. Then its lips parted, and without making a sound, it mouthed something. "You are not supposed to be here." I stumbled back, my heart slamming against my ribs. The moment my hand left the glass, the world around me shifted. The darkness wasn't empty anymore. Shadows stretched and twisted, forming shapes that felt almost human but not quite. They stood at the edges of my vision, shifting, observing. I couldn't see their faces, but I could feel their attention, pressing into me like 1,000 invisible hands. A sound cut through the silence. A whisper, but not in a language I recognized. It came from everywhere at once, crawling under my skin, burrowing into my mind. The shadows pressed closer. The glass behind me pulsed, warping as if it were breathing. And then a light. Distant at first, then growing stronger, slicing through the dark like a blade. The whispering stopped. The shadows recoiled, shrinking back as the glow spread, swallowing everything. The glass behind me shattered soundlessly, and suddenly I was falling again, weightless, spiraling through a void that stretched forever. Then impact. I gasped, lungs burning as I collapsed onto something solid, cold stone beneath my hands. My head spun as I forced myself to focus, to take in my surroundings. I was no longer in the void. I was in a city, but not any city I recognized. The buildings stretched impossibly high, their surfaces smooth and seamless, reflecting the pale, colorless sky. There were no signs, no windows, no lights, just towering structures that loomed over me like silent sentinels. The streets were empty, wide and pristine. But there were no people, no cars, no sounds of life, just silence. I stood, my legs unsteady. My clothes were the same, my hands still trembling from whatever had just happened. But something was off. My watch had stopped. The second hand wasn't ticking. It was stuck, frozen at exactly 3:33 a.m. A flicker of movement caught my eye. At the far end of the street, a figure stood motionless. I couldn't make out any details, only the shape of a man, his posture too still, too perfect. He was watching me. I took a step forward, so did he. I stopped, so did he. My mouth went dry. I turned sharply, heart pounding, and started walking in the opposite direction. I didn't look back, but I felt him following. Not footsteps, not sound, just the oppressive weight of unseen eyes. The buildings stretched higher, their surfaces distorting subtly, like reflections on water. Nothing here was stable. The street opened into a vast, empty plaza. At its center stood something impossible. A door. A massive, freestanding door, unattached to any structure, carved from something dark and ancient. Symbols I didn't recognize were etched into its surface, shifting the longer I looked at them. I felt something then, deep in my bones. A pull. The moment I stepped toward it, a voice cut through the silence. "Don't." I spun. The man was closer now, no longer a distant shape, but standing just a few feet away. His face was blank, not blurred, not featureless, just wrong, as if my mind refused to process it. "You don't belong here," he said. His voice wasn't a sound, it was a feeling, a thought that wasn't my own, pressing into my skull. I couldn't move. "You shouldn't have come this far." My breath hitched. The air rippled, and suddenly the plaza didn't feel empty anymore. Shadows pooled at the edges, twisting unnaturally. The city was waking up. The man tilted his head slightly, as if considering something. Then, slowly, he lifted his hand and pointed. "To the door?" "Choose." I looked at it, then back at him. And then the world shattered. The moment the world shattered, I expected pain, I expected oblivion. Instead, I felt nothing, just a sudden, violent absence, as if the universe had blinked and, for a fraction of a second, forgotten I existed. Then, I was somewhere else. I stood in a vast, empty space, neither dark nor light, stretching endlessly in all directions. It felt like the moments between waking and dreaming, when reality is uncertain and the mind hasn't yet decided what's real. There was no sound, no air, no temperature, just existence without context. My own body felt distant, weightless, like I was an observer in someone else's skin. Then I saw him, the man from the city, or at least something that looked like him. He stood several feet away, but he was different now, more defined, more present, as if he had been a blurred concept before and only now solidified into something real. His face was still wrong, too smooth, too symmetrical, as if carved by something that understood what a face should look like, but had never actually seen one. His eyes, though, were unmistakably human, and they were staring directly at me. "You are beginning to understand," he said. His voice was inside my head, a vibration in my bones rather than a sound. He took a slow step forward, his presence distorting the space around him like heat waves off asphalt. What am I understanding? My own voice felt thin, stretched, barely my own. That everything you know is a construct, that your life has never truly been your own. I wanted to deny it, to push back, to argue that he was wrong, but I couldn't. Because deep down, I already knew. The anomalies, the gaps in reality, the way time twisted and rewrote itself around me, the case that disappeared, my own reflections speaking words I had never said. He gestured with one hand, and suddenly the void came alive. Around us, the space flickered like a broken screen, then reshaped itself into fragments of my own memories. Images materialized in midair, like projected film reels playing scenes from my life, only they weren't quite right. I saw myself as a child sitting at the dinner table with my mother, but the words she spoke weren't hers. The movements were slightly off, like a poorly rendered animation. Another flicker, me in high school, sitting in a classroom, but the teacher's face was empty, a blank oval where eyes and a mouth should be. Another flicker, another memory. Me, first day at the FBI, shaking hands with my supervisor, except now I noticed something I had never seen before. A brief moment of distortion, like a glitch when our hands met, as if the scene had reset for a fraction of a second. My stomach twisted. "What is this?" I whispered. "Your past, or at least the version of it they allowed you to remember." My breath came fast and shallow. This wasn't possible. These were my memories, my experiences. But the more I watched, the more I saw the seams, the places where reality had been edited. A shadow in the background that hadn't been there before, a person walking one way, then suddenly walking the opposite direction when I blinked. I turned to him, my pulse hammering. "Who are you?" "A witness." "A witness to what?" He gestured again, and the world shifted once more. The fragments of my past collapsed, folding in on themselves, replaced by something deeper, darker. I wasn't in the void anymore. I was somewhere else. A city, but not the one from before. This one was impossible. Skyscrapers twisting into the sky at unnatural angles, streets that curved where they shouldn't, staircases that led to nowhere. Figures walked the streets, but their faces were missing, their movements too synchronized, like puppets on invisible strings. "This is where your world is created," the man said. A cold dread settled in my chest. "What do you mean, created?" "You believe your reality is stable, that history is linear, that cause and effect govern the flow of time, but that is an illusion. The world you know is constantly being rewritten, adjusted, erased, and reshaped as needed. Those who control it do not rule nations or corporations, they rule existence itself." I stared at him, trying to process his words. "You're saying reality is manipulated?" "More than manipulated, constructed." The city around us shifted, and suddenly I was standing in an office. My office. My old desk, my files, my laptop. Except, I wasn't alone. A man sat in my chair. I recognized him immediately. Holloway, my boss, or rather, the man who had been my boss before he started acting like a stranger. He didn't seem to notice me. Instead, he was speaking to someone I couldn't see, his voice calm, measured. "Carter is becoming aware," he said. Something inside me turned to ice. "Should we reset?" a voice responded, one that sent terror through me, because it was my own voice. Holloway nodded. "Yes, he's getting too close." And then everything collapsed again. The office vanished, the city faded, and I was back in the void, gasping for breath. The man was still there, watching me with something almost like pity. "They have done this to you before," he said. I shook my head violently. No, this was a lie. This was a trick." "You're lying," I spat. "Am I?" And then he raised his hand one final time, and the last fragment of truth fell into place. I saw myself. Not here, not now, Dozens of versions of me, moving in and out of time, in and out of different lives. Some were in the FBI, some were not. Some were dead, some were trapped in endless loops, repeating the same actions over and over, unaware that they had done them before. And then, the worst part. I saw them. The ones who stood behind the curtain, unseen, rewriting the world as they saw fit, not human, not gods, something else entirely. They turned toward me, and they saw me watching. The moment they saw me, everything changed. The void trembled, the space around me twisting like liquid, collapsing and reforming in an instant. My body felt wrong, as if I was being pulled apart and rewritten at the same time. My mind screamed, instincts begging me to run, to wake up, to escape. But there was nowhere to go. The entities weren't like the man who had guided me here. They weren't human. They weren't even pretending to be. They were something else entirely. Their forms were unstable, flickering between shapes, shifting between silhouettes of people I had known. My mother, my boss, Whitaker, even myself, before breaking apart into something incomprehensible. They had no faces, no true features, only the overwhelming weight of their presence pressing against my thoughts, making it impossible to think clearly. "You should not have seen," one of them said, though its voice didn't come from a mouth. It came from inside me, crawling through my brain like a parasite. "He is outside the loop," another whispered, its words warping reality around them. I tried to move, to take a step back, but the void itself held me in place. My breath came in shallow gasps. They weren't just observing me, they were studying me, deciding. "What are you, Aisha?" I forced the words out, though my voice barely sounded like my own. For the first time they laughed. It wasn't a sound, it was an event, a rupture in space, something that made every cell in my body scream. "We are the architects, the curators, the keepers of history, the ones who decide what is remembered and what is erased." I gritted my teeth, trying to push back against the crushing force of their words. "You rewrite reality?" I said, my mind racing. "You control time?" "We control perception, and perception is all that matters." A sudden shift, and I was no longer in the void. I was back in my childhood home, standing in the kitchen where my mother used to make breakfast. The smell of coffee filled the air, sunlight streaming through the window. It was warm, familiar, safe. Except I had never been here before. Not like this. The furniture was slightly different. The kitchen table had 6 chairs instead of 4. The refrigerator was covered in magnets I didn't recognize, pictures of a childhood that wasn't mine. A woman stood at the stove, humming softly, her back to me. "Mom?" My voice trembled. She turned, smiling, but it wasn't her. Her face was almost right, but her eyes were empty, glassy, staring through me rather than at me. "Michael, sweetheart," she said gently, "you're home now." I took a step back, heart pounding. "This isn't real." "It is as real as you need it to be," one of the entities whispered. The kitchen rippled, distorting like melting wax. The warmth vanished, replaced by cold, suffocating silence. The illusion shattered, and I was back in the void, gasping for air. The entities loomed closer. "Why are you showing me this?" "To offer you a choice." A choice. My mind reeled, searching for meaning in their words. "You are an anomaly," they continued, "a fracture in the system. You were meant to forget, to reset, but you resist. This has happened before, and it will happen again, unless you choose." "Choose what?" The void shifted once more. In front of me, 2 doors appeared, identical in design, massive, dark, carved with symbols that seemed to move when I wasn't looking. "Amandor will take you back," they said. "Your life will resume. You will wake up in your apartment, the case forgotten, reality intact. You will remember none of this. You will be free." I swallowed hard, staring at the first door. It was tempting to go back, to wake up and pretend none of this ever happened, to return to a world where time was stable, where memories were real, where I wasn't hunted by things beyond comprehension. And the other? The other door leads to knowledge, to truth. You will retain your memories, but you will be hunted. You will never be safe. You will know what you were never meant to know, and you will exist outside the loop. I looked at the second door, the weight of their words crushed down on me. If I go back, will this happen again? Yes, and you will not remember. You have already chosen before. A chill crawled up my spine. How many times? For the first time, they hesitated, and that silence was the worst answer of all. I had already chosen before, and I had forgotten. How many times had I been here, standing in this void, facing this choice, only to step through the first door and wake up as if nothing had ever happened? How many versions of me were lost, erased, rewritten? I clenched my fists. I didn't want to forget. I didn't want to be a puppet in a story I wasn't allowed to remember. Slowly, I turned toward the second door. The entities moved then, their forms flickering wildly as if they hadn't expected this. You will regret this, they warned. Maybe. But for the first time, the choice was mine, and I stepped through. The moment I stepped through the door, the world fractured. My body felt like it was being pulled apart, stretched across dimensions I couldn't comprehend. There was no up or down, no forward or backward, just an overwhelming collapse of reality itself, as if I had stepped off the edge of existence and into something that had no name. Then came the pain. It wasn't physical, not in the way I had known pain before. It was deeper, more primal, like my mind was being rewritten in real time, fighting against something that didn't want me to exist anymore. Images, memories, voices, things that weren't mine, flashed through me in a violent cascade. People I had never met, lives I had never lived, entire histories that had been erased, pouring into me all at once. My own past splintered, fractured, reconstructed itself in ways that didn't make sense. I saw other versions of me, making different choices, stepping through different doors, living and dying and resetting over and over and over. And then, just as suddenly, it stopped. I gasped for air, my lungs burning as if I had been drowning. I was lying on something cold and hard, a floor. The scent of disinfectant and stale air filled my nose. Fluorescent lights buzzed faintly above me. My body ached, my limbs stiff and unresponsive, my mind still reeling from the impossible. I forced myself to focus. I was in a hospital. A machines beeped softly beside me. An IV drip connected to my arm. A heart monitor pulsed steadily. The walls were the sickly off-white of every generic medical facility I'd ever been in. My fingers twitched against the sheets. I was real again. The door to the room creaked open. A nurse stepped inside, holding a clipboard, her face the practiced neutrality of someone used to dealing with difficult patients. But when she saw me awake, her eyes widened in shock. "Hey, Carter," she said, voice uncertain. I tried to respond, but my throat was raw, my voice barely a whisper. "How long?" "You've been in a coma for 3 days," she said. "You were found unconscious in your apartment. No signs of injury, no explanation. The doctors, they don't know what happened." My mind reeled. My apartment? That didn't make sense. I had been in that impossible city. I had stepped through that door. I had made my choice. I struggled to sit up, every muscle in my body screaming in protest. "My apartment," I rasped. "Who found me?" The nurse hesitated. "Your supervisor, Agent Holloway. He said you hadn't shown up for work, that he went to check on you and found you unconscious." Holloway. The name sent a jolt of adrenaline through me. I grabbed her wrist with more strength than I thought I had. "What day is it?" She looked startled. "Mount 14? My stomach dropped. March 14. The same day Whitaker's file had been erased. The same date that had appeared on the impossible Polaroid of me in an event that never happened. The same date that I had seen looping through my past. Rewritten, manipulated, repeating. I had returned. But had I really escaped? Before I could ask more questions, the nurse pulled away, muttering something about getting the doctor. The moment she left, I yanked the IV from my arm, ignoring the sharp sting, and swung my legs off the bed. My clothes were folded neatly on the chair beside me, my FBI-issued suit, clean, untouched, as if nothing had ever happened, as if everything I had seen, everything I had remembered, was just a bad dream. But it wasn't. I could still feel it, the weight of the truth pressing against my mind, the knowledge that I was not supposed to remember. I dressed quickly, my hands shaking as I buttoned my shirt. I needed to get out of here. I needed to find proof that I hadn't lost my mind. My phone was in my jacket pocket. I turned it on, heart pounding as I scrolled through my call log, my messages, anything that might confirm which version of reality I was in now. Then I saw it. A single unread text from an unknown number, no timestamp, no sender ID, just 5 words. You were not supposed to. The hospital room suddenly felt too quiet. The walls seemed to press in, the steady beeping of the heart monitor now a deafening metronome. I looked around, scanning for anything, anyone, out of place. Then I saw the window. Across the street, on the rooftop of a building that overlooked the hospital, a man was standing, dressed in black, motionless, facing directly toward me. My pulse skyrocketed. I took a step back, my mind flashing to the figure in the city, the man who had followed me through that empty world. Was it the same one? Or was it one of them? I blinked, and he was gone. I grabbed my phone and my jacket and bolted for the door. I didn't care about protocol. I didn't care about explaining myself to the doctors. I needed to move. I needed to get back to my apartment, check my files, find something, anything that could prove I was still in control of my own mind. The hospital hallway stretched endlessly before me as I walked quickly, keeping my head down, my breath shallow. Nurses and doctors moved past me, their faces blurred, their voices muffled, as if I were still caught between realities. I reached the exit. The glass doors slid open. Cold air hit my face. The world outside looked normal. Cars honking, people walking, a man laughing into his phone. But now I knew better. I knew the world wasn't what it seemed. And worse, I knew they were watching me. I didn't go back to my apartment. I knew better. If I had been found there once, it meant they had put me there. Whatever they had erased, whatever they had reset, my apartment was a part of it. A constructed illusion, a carefully placed checkpoint in my life to keep me inside the loop. If I went back, I might wake up tomorrow with no memory of this. So I disappeared. I ditched my phone first, smashing it against a brick wall before tossing the pieces down a storm drain. The texts, "You were not supposed to." I could still see those words, burned into my mind like a scar. They knew, they always knew, but this time, so did I. I stole a car, cheap model, no GPS tracking, drove for hours without a real destination, stopping only for gas, keeping my head down, avoiding cameras. The paranoia wasn't paranoia anymore, it was survival. Every face in the crowd felt familiar, every car in my rearview mirror seemed to be following me just a little too long. It was only a matter of time before they tried to correct this, to drag me back into a version of reality where I had never asked the wrong questions. I needed proof. Something real, something they couldn't erase. At a truck stop just outside the city, I found what I was looking for. An old coin-operated internet terminal shoved into the corner of a dimly lit diner. No digital footprint, no way to trace it back to me. I logged into an encrypted email I had set up years ago for investigations that weren't meant to be found. And then I started writing everything. The case, the erased files, the impossible dates, the city that shouldn't exist, the beings who rewrite reality itself. I sent it to everyone, journalists, whistleblowers, conspiracy theorists, private investigators, anyone who might listen, anyone who might be able to spread it before it was wiped away. I didn't care if they thought I was insane. I just needed someone to see it before I disappeared again. As soon as I hit send, the screen flickered. For just a second, the cursor froze. The words I had typed warped, rearranging themselves into something else. The email erased itself line by line until only one sentence remained. "This is your last warning." I shoved back from the screen, my pulse hammering. They were already here. I stumbled out of the diner, scanning the lot, expecting to see them. Figures in the dark, shadows without faces, but the lot was empty, just the hum of neon lights, the distant rumble of passing trucks. And then a payphone rang. Shrill, mechanical, unnatural. It was impossible. No one used payphones anymore. No one even knew I was here. But it rang for me. I hesitated, just for a second. Then I picked up. Silence. Then a voice, smooth, controlled. "You should have chosen the other door, Michael." A chill slid down my spine. "You can still fix this," the voice continued. "Go home, sleep. When you wake up, all of this will be gone. You'll be safe again." I swallowed hard. "And if I don't?" A pause. "Then you won't wake up at all." The line went dead. I stood there, gripping the receiver, the dial tone buzzing in my ear, my heart pounding so hard it hurt. They weren't lying. They had done it before. Erased me, reset me, rewrote my life. But this time, something was different. This time I remembered. I took a slow breath, dropped the receiver, and walked back to my stolen car. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I had to keep moving. Because as long as I did, as long as I stayed outside their reach, maybe, just maybe, this version of me would survive. And if you're hearing this, if somehow this story reaches you before they erase it, ask yourself one question. Are you sure your memories are real?